Personally, can I just say a little bit on a personal basis as an individual? I'm really pleased to be here as one of the generation who had to leave Scotland to work abroad after the disappointment of the devolution referendum in 1979. I went off and joined the Foreign Office and worked in the European Commission. I've been really pleased to see organisations like NIDOS and others develop an international focus since in recent years, particularly the International Development Strategy in 2005. But over the years, when I've been sort of moving between working abroad and working in Scotland, I've always been conscious of the paradox that the world is really interested in Scotland. There's a lot of things happening here that are of great development. People can follow Scottish policy developments and see that this is actually a place where things are happening. But we've always been found it very difficult to actually apply some of that thinking and apply some of that direct work to the way in which Scotland engages abroad, whether through the UK or on its own back. Our policy instruments tend to focus on domestic policy and don't really capture the opportunities that lie in working externally. And it's really only in recent years, I think, particularly with the International Development Strategy in from 2005 onwards, that we've been really seeking to make linkages, particularly in the health and education area. And what I'm particularly interested in showing or seeking to demonstrate now is that the way in which the international policy and financing structures are increasingly focusing on energy and climate change provides a real opportunity to add to the work that's already been doing in education and health to actually provide a new dimension, which can, in particular, if we get it right, given the links between business and energy and climate change domestically in Scotland and on a European scale, offer real opportunities for delivering significant benefit in international development. So that's my thesis, and I'll be interested in your response. But anyway, if you can move on to the, have I got them? I've got the control, yes. Good. Right, so, and I think this is an important point about the International Development Strategy, which of course came out of the way in which the Millennium Development Goals were involved. I was actually working in the private sector back in 2005, wasn't it? The great area where Scotland did actually help to drive the future with the approach to make poverty history. And at that point, you know, Scotland does have an opportunity to provide a real unique approach, considering focusing on best practice, country-led identification of need, community-led development and sharing of knowledge and skills transfer. And what I think is particularly important about this, despite the very small amounts of money that are directly applied by the Scottish Government, is that the approach can actually create partnerships with foreign countries, particularly if you can match together policy aspirations with delivery mechanisms, which can actually make things happen in a way which is not. And I mean, having been involved in international development for many years, there's a lot of reports which end up on shelves, gathering dust for whatever reason. There's a lot of brilliant ideas that never get implemented. The advantage of matching together the policy approach with a partnership approach, bringing people together at decision-making level, which I think has come through the Malawi exercise and is coming through elsewhere, is actually means that there's more likelihood of making things happen. So a small amount of approach, if it aligns with the priorities of the country concerned and with international development funds, can actually make more happen. So I think we do have this opportunity of trying to tackle the paradox that I mentioned. There we go. So in the Scottish policy context, there's a very strong wish, made clearly by the previous Scottish Executive, but reinforced by the current Scottish Government, to advance Scotland's place in the world as a responsible nation, building mutually beneficial links with developing countries. Now, in the Scottish policy context, it's also important to stress that there have been changes in development. And these changes, I argue, align very well with changes that are happening at the international level. And you'll have seen from the publication of the Government Economic Strategy last Monday, a week ago, that the low-carbon economy has been put at the centre of the Government Economic Strategy. Strategy to that effect was published a year ago, but now that's been put at the centre of the approach. And this is all about making Scotland a leader internationally in the development of not only renewable energies, which I mentioned, which I'll talk about, but also increasing the productivity of industries, reducing input costs, making production much more effective, and focusing on environment and clean technologies, which is a real growing industry worldwide. So we now have a position whereby Scotland is actually ahead of much of the rest of the world in terms of the approach that we're putting in terms of policy in supporting a low carbon economy, which is becoming increasingly important at the world level. And in 2007 and 2011, the SNP made very strong political commitments to international energy engagement in Europe, but also internationally. And the other element of the policy context I will stress is that we're in an environment now where we don't just run off and do our own things as organisations or as individual parts of the political system. We actually need to work cooperatively. The only way we're going to meet our objectives in terms of economic growth, experts, sustainability and the low carbon economy is this is done as a partnership between business, industry and the social sector. And that the funding streams need to be aligned rather than operating in extension. And that's very important in the domestic context, but it also offers an opportunity if we can get it right for international action as well. Let's move on. International policy context, and this is where I think things have changed fundamentally since 2001, 2005. The international climate change negotiations are creating real momentum in bringing about a sustainable approach to development. And I mean, I was part of the UK delegation along with our minister at the climate change talks in Cancun last November, where there is increasing momentum going behind the whole concept of providing significant amount of international funding in order to encourage the developing world, whether it's emerging developed economies or the poorest countries, to increasingly focus their model of development on a sustainable model of development, which can include renewable energy, can include climate change adaptation, and can include these things. And there's 100 billion green fund will be set up by 2020, so 100 billion of international funding will go in that direction from the EU. The UK is a leader in this area and is very keen to capture Scottish expertise in this area. So is Europe, and so are the international development banks, and I'll say something about that. Is it new money? There is always a recycling of money that goes on in the sector, so it's an increasing priority for existing organisations. But one thing you can be absolutely sure of, in that the G77 in their approach to negotiations are absolutely clear that they do not want they will not agree to any international framework on climate change which doesn't involve clear amounts of new money. And there's some very interesting things that are being done in this area. So what we have actually is a situation whereby international agreements on climate change and international commitments, particularly by countries, we had the Chinese Vice Prime Minister here in January, and they're putting a very strong emphasis on low carbon areas, which is actually a challenge to us because the Chinese do it seriously, given their ability to influence developing countries through putting their money where their mouth is in terms of infrastructure development, particularly in Africa, where real changes are being made. Then it's important that we're part of that game as well. And given the way in which Scotland has positioned itself on energy and climate change, we now have an opportunity to actually develop a business at home, but also encourage Scottish business to operate internationally, taking advantage of a position as a first mover. So let's move on. In terms of the way the international development strategy and international engagement strategy of the Scottish Government is developing now, a current clear focus is on international engagement on energy and climate change. So it's promoting Scotland as an international destination for low carbon investment, but also promoting high ambition on climate change by the international community and supporting developing countries. So if I can say a little bit about that. First of all, in relation to Malawi, there's been some very important work being done by Strathclyde University in terms of community-owned solar panels. And there's a real potential to scale up that work Malawi's been struggling for years to find ways to find finance to increase its current level of rural electrification, currently 8% into other communities. Renewable energy offers a fantastic opportunity to do that, whether it's at the community level through solar panels, or also through a country which actually has a strong wind resource in other areas. So there's a real opportunity to actually use the funding streams that are coming through to actually make a real difference where all their project proposals for the last 10 years have sat on a shelf and not been taken forward. We can actually make things happen now. We can use the partnership with Malawi and the real policy understandings to take things forward. Maldives. Maldives is not a poor country. The Maldives is in the middle of the exercise, but it is a model country in climate change, and we've been working with them in order to develop their tidal potential. So there was an announcement made back in 31st of August this year about work in that area. And the last point I want to stress, work being done through the development banks. And I think the development banks, who are encouraged or rather instructed by their governors to support the international climate change process, are now making substantial amounts of funding available in this area. And this is where a particular opportunity for business lies. Business, like whether it's Malawi, whether it's in Maldives. Back to Malawi, I should have mentioned Zambia in that context, and lots of important work being, which I know as a kid, I used to live there, where important work is being done in terms of climate change adaptations, which SKIAF are leading. I think climate change adaptation is also an area where we've got real opportunities of working in a business sense in relation to land use, agriculture, forestry, and other areas to drive it forward. And we're working with the International Development Bank under a memorandum of understanding. They want to tap into Scottish expertise. They see Scotland as a leader. We want to use the mechanisms we have, including the Energy Technology Partnership set up under a low carbon area, to take these things forward. So my message is, Scotland is seen as a leader in these areas. We do have a very strong partnership between business and government and academia and the social sector at the domestic level, which is increasingly operating internationally. We have a real opportunity, I believe, in incorporating that into our international development strategy to work with academia, with business, with NIDOS and with your organisations in particular to drive this forward in a targeted way internationally, using small amounts of Scottish money to leverage activity which is supported by these countries, which can in time bring in substantial amounts of more funding from elsewhere. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the rest of the day.